trespass. Just a quick look at some of the responses that you're putting in as you follow the conversation online. Abdullah Yusuf says, Nation Media Group has become like New York Times and Jubilee became like Trump, always complaining. Paper Boy Rock says, yes, Mark has just said the system in Majambazi was a hashtag to be used as we set the agenda for the looting. And Sami Anyona, why do accounting amateurs suddenly know every detail on audit reports? And Noriega Dennis, again, not accounted for does not mean stolen. NTV Kenya is suffering from the Trump syndrome. Keep your opinions coming in. I like them when they're honest and, of course, non-insulting. I'll appreciate that. Let me give an opportunity to Dorothy to respond to what was brought up in the first part by Bwana Eric Kiraithe. I saw you taking some notes there.
Yeah. I wish to disagree with my friend, Mr. Kiraithe. I call him my friend because we have related very well previously.
Up until now. Go ahead,
and
sorry.
I want to believe that we shall still leave this place friends. I think that the media would be a very sad place to work in if they folded their hands and waited till the government machinery did its bit to give them the sanitized reports to report, you know. But at the same time, I know and I want to believe, and the little that I read, I know that my colleagues tried to reach out. They would be extremely irresponsible. And when I was sitting on the Revised editor's desk, I would insist on seeing, did you get the response? Did you reach out? You know, and if they say they reached out and the officers who are supposed to respond ducked, what are we supposed to do? As far as I'm concerned, the guilty are afraid, and they may be afraid to talk. And if they are afraid to talk, they should not then gag us.
All right.
I don't want to be the devil's advocate, but many years ago when I was a court reporter, I knew that to balance a court story, if you get somebody's affidavit who is suing somebody else, it is imperative that you get the replying affidavit. Otherwise, if you run one affidavit, you're being unfair on the other party. And I, in the process also of covering business, I know that where there is an audit query, there should be audit answers. And that audit query is not a complete report. And if I say there is 90 million shillings missing here, that's an audit query. I think it would be fair for me to also find out from the person who is responsible, what do you have to say about this missing 90 million shillings?
Right.
He might have a perfectly logical explanation that then makes my whole question null and void.
Right.
And in this case, I think we have been talking about an audit query. Somebody saying, this is unaccounted for, we want answers to this, and we want answers to this. And so to the extent that it was inconclusive, and the fact that actually the auditor was asking questions, I don't think it is also fair to completely embrace it and say, this is a final report, money has disappeared. So I think it is okay to say questions have been asked.
Right.
And therefore take the following 5 days without sleeping to try and answer those questions. What did the auditor have to say? I think somebody like the CS Mailu was caught off guard. He didn't expect this to come. It landed on his desk. He didn't know how to respond. Therefore, he said, let's get answers. He has made an effort since then to explain some of the things that were raised.
All right.
So I think we should also be objective enough to say, has the CS Mailu added any value to this
query
discussion, instead of completely dismissing it and saying,
just
it was published, therefore it must be true.
Okay.
But
would you have made decisions, taken a different decision as the managing editor at the Star if you had this leaked interim audit report?
I would have published it, and I will give you the example of NYS.
Okay.
I published the original NYS story based on a letter written by CBK questioning the huge payments that were being made by NYS.
Right.
And that usually is the source of most of the investigative stories that we have. Somebody who thinks that something is going wrong will take a document and give it to you. And there is so much verification you can do, and you cannot keep holding that document for 1 week trying to verify it. So long as it has an element of truth, then it's good to go. But after you publish, you then must interrogate the issue further. Remember, so many people come to you with the various documents, and everybody who is bringing for you a story has an interest.
An agenda.
I tell people, even the person inviting you to cover the children's swimming competition has an agenda. Whatever the agenda is, it might not be as serious as corruption. But then, we then had to raise the bar higher so that it's not just somebody, telling you what they feel like saying. On the other hand, you find then that somebody else will write a letter to the EACC and say, Mr. Gathara stole 50 million. As soon as it's stamped received, they bring for you and say, Gathara is under investigation by EACC. We have written a letter, it is received. Therefore, that no longer becomes enough. Or somebody is therefore saying, I'm going to file a case against Dorothy because she sold 5 million. The threat to sue is no longer enough. Now we say, you go to court. Then we can use the documents you have lodged in court that you can also be held accountable for.
Okay.
So I'm saying, let's be objective and look at both sides. There is money that seems to have disappeared. The CS is also making his explanations. Let's be objective enough to also look at the explanation and not dismiss it offhand.
All right. Well, real quick, and then Patrick
Mark,
has
I think,
a lot of responses.
and I think that's great contribution. I think we would want to probably remember, one, broadly speaking, I think there's been, in all this conversation, there's been a focus on, or at least government focus has shifted to legality. Were they legitimate, and these were monies from port A to B in advance of C, and that stuff. And I'll tell you why that's particularly problematic. But before that, let me address the question of whether the due process of digging in, verification, corroboration. And I think the really sad thing that is kind of been swept under the rug with all this hullabaloo is the conduct of a very senior public officer in the person and title of the principal secretary.
Yeah.
And the context of that insult, threats, and by there would be, I wish Bwana Kiraithe could tell us whether there's actually an official government program that monitors journalists' bank accounts and phone numbers. I think it's important that the nation is at ease. That was it. Yeah,
I think my phone is listened to every day.
I know.
Carry on, Michael.
But so I think that is something that needs clarification. But I think the process, the circumstance under which P.S. Muraguri threatened the journalist was a process of verification. I think we kind of tend to miss that. That's actually documented very well, that there was an attempt to actually find out, speak to a very senior public officer who flipped that and started to threaten a journalist. That was responsibility on the side of the journalist to do their work. Number two, let me come back to the question of, so there's a lot of legality, and I think this is where the media needs to actually focus. And I like what you said, Bwana Kerich, that this is a story for everybody, every media house, and we need to go beyond the sensationalizing and the breaking news to, go deeper into what are the fundamental issues in this story. So if the government turned around today and told us and confirmed, verified that actually there is no money that has been stolen, I would be extremely disappointed by the media and the critical mass because, one, there is a process, these monies have been spent in contravention of the Constitution. That is already on record. The government, through the Ministry of Health, has usurped the county.
He raises concern with that.
The county government's
just to
functions.
that point, Gathara, don't worry, I'll
Yes.
give you an opportunity.
County government.
Just let him ask the question as he
let me
responds.
correct him. I admired your input initially because it was impartial. Now you have reached a point where you are saying the constitution was breached. The answer is no. And the ministry carried a paid advertisement, at least on that issue of procedure.
Okay.
The entire constitutional process as it relates to budgets was followed and followed to the letter.
All right, you've responded to that.
That is a correction.
Orwa.
I have a lot to say, but
Yes,
let me
Orwa, let him
for
finish his point, and then Gathara has some questions to put to you. Based
Thank
on
you.
your
That
first-
is in contestation.
Yes.
As we speak, on Thursday when we held health stakeholders policy dialogue on this particular issue, at a time when the other half of the civil society was engaged in a mass demonstration to put pressure on accountability, another segment was doing a policy dialogue and analysis of what the ministry had responded to. And in that space, what we have, and we have verified, is that the county, the Council of Governors, which we wrote a formal letter to ask them at what point or whether at all there was any conversation with the national government to transfer some of their responsibilities, which is primary health care, including maternity, to the national government. And they are categorical that there is no such engagement with the national government. So that is on record, and that letter and the response is both on social media and formally as a response to us. So that is taken care of. Now, number two is we are speaking, and this addresses really the issue of whether the government would want to say that if this was a conclusive audit, then they would have, if the conclusive audit would have told us that money has been stolen, misappropriated, wasted, etc., then the government would have taken action. Now, I have zero reason to believe that. In fact, I'm at a negative in integers. Why? As we speak, Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunizations, in its website, it has a final conclusive report that 160 million Kenya shillings given for vaccination for this country was stolen, misappropriated, or misused. I don't know which word, which statement would be pleasing to my friend Kiraithe, because he has a problem with my choice of words. Right. But this is on record. This is the previous financial year. 160 million, which the government of Kenya paid back in order to unlock further aid to our republic. Remember, Mark, the government never works. Every single cent the government uses or misuses is yours and mine. When we were waiting outside there, I saw there's a temptation to have toll payment on roads. It's a great thing. We have had significant infrastructure development in this country in the last 10 years, and it's something commendable. The challenge is, you tax people more, there is zero accountability, it is robbery without violence.
All right. Let me stop you at that. Gathara has some points to bring on the table.
Well, I'll just go back to what Mr. Kiraithe had said at the beginning. And I think I have a few problems with it, which we discussed during the break. I think first is this idea that we've got to wait for government to tell us when it has stolen. Or when
will that really happen?
Yeah, when its employees have stolen, we do know that never happens. I mean, all you have to do is think back. How did we know about Golden Bag? These were all leaked documents that were given out. If we go into a situation where, which is, I think, what he was proposing, that we should never steal, that's the word you used, government documents, then how do we ever hold a government accountable? We can't hold it only on the basis of what it chooses to tell us. It cannot be the arbiter of what we hear. And this is my argument, that when nation gets this report, they are entitled to make a conclusion out of it. Now, you can argue whether the conclusion is right or wrong. That is fine. Government has been arguing that it was wrong. But the government is not the arbiter of truth. It is not the standard of truth. When they say it is 3.2, not 5.1, it is government's view. That is their take, that it is 5.1. Nation is quite entitled to say, well, actually it's not, it's 5.1 billion. And then we can argue, we can look at the report and say, well, who is right or wrong? But that's not to say nation is not entitled to make a conclusion. The other thing is, I think it is not the media's job to keep government secrets.
Okay.
You know, government has its own mechanism that it doesn't want you and me to know, even though it is accountable to us, you know, or at least nominally accountable to us. But it is not the media's job to retain that aura of secrecy. The media's job is actually to find out that which government doesn't want to tell us. You know, and so when these reports are leaked, they're not stolen. They're actually public documents. We pay for them with our taxes. We pay for the processes that Mr. Kiraithe over here articulated at length. You know, so for me, the long and short of it is government is entitled to its narrative, but the media doesn't need to be tied down to that narrative. That is not the standard of truth.
I know you have a few more points, but in being criticized, the media can't be told to actually keep the government secrets. And if you can just go over the brief points so that Kiraithe can respond.
I mean, all I was saying is it's not the media's job to keep government secrets. The documents that government wants to keep secret from us, such as the interim audit report, you know, it is not their job. You know, you keep your secrets. The media's job is actually to ferret them out and tell us the things that government doesn't want us to hear. The other thing, as I was saying, is the government is not the standard of truth. You know, they've got their narrative, they've got what they think is truth, but that is not the standard we should use, that money has only been stolen if government accepts it's been stolen. In this regard, think of how they've reacted to their own auditor telling them they can't account for the Eurobond.
Okay. Kiraithe.
What I would want to inform Mr. Gathara is that maybe he has not studied the new structure of government under the new constitution. The government has got several independent institutions. Another thing I want to make very clear, like the Auditor General, you know that sometimes even the government itself has not totally agreed with him because of the impression he creates. Like when he created an impression that the Central Bank of US, so that I can be well understood, or the Federal Reserve Bank, when he implied that it was colluding to steal money, of course, even the president wondered around aloud, surely, are you serious? The other thing I would want to make very clear is that an interim audit report is not a secret. It's not a secret. And I think if
it took it to be leaked.
And all the ministries are doing it. Let me tell you one thing,
right,
and I've been avoiding to say this.
Yes.
What we are dealing with here is not the interim audit report. You recall such obvious things like somebody saying that no containers were delivered at all. We know the containers are there. You recall
the 10 million containers.
I have told you simple calculations. I'm glad Kerich has read the report. Simple computation gives a different figure. And if the truth be told, there are people who are very, very unhappy with this government's development record. And they have lacked something to say. And they had to seize this report. You can see their celebration of it.
Talking about opposition.
And of course, it was given as an opposition agenda. I don't have an opinion. Opposition can win or can lose. I don't care. But the fact of the matter is that if we are criticizing this particular government, not the Gutenberg government, not the Anglo-Listen government, not the youth fund government, but if we are criticizing this government, let's give it what it's due to it. And I can give a very simple example.
What do you mean give it what it's due?
Let me deal with the other issue.
You can jump in.
Because it is 4 against 1.
Actually, no.
On that point, let me agree with him and support him. I agree. This government is really development oriented.
Let me discharge my responsibility first.
Okay.
I will require your assistance in due course.
Yes, thanks.
Then we look at it very practically. The Principal Secretary Muragoli receives clear information that a document has been stolen from your ministry and it will be used maliciously. And in all humility, he tries to outreach. And he went to a very simple restaurant. I wouldn't expect a principal secretary there myself. And he is tip recorded. The issue, I have gone through that transcript, and he severally requested, you have postponed even publishing it.
Yes, by a day.
Why don't you give us 1 day? He said, 1 day will not kill the story. You have it for heaven's sake. Because he realized, I am very sure neither the cabinet secretary nor the principal secretary had been able to go through those issues. You know, when you think about the way a project is conceived, because the audit process is a very long process.
Yes.
And to the point at which somebody is requesting for the allocation to fund it. Some of these, like the mobile clinics, are from the first NAC government. I think it was Gilo. But of course, there are people who get very, very sensitive when they hear that the conditions in the slums are being improved. And I think these are the sensitivities which formed the hula baloo. I think one thing which is coming out very clearly here, and which people are very hard to admit, you can be a very bad critic of the Jubilee administration, but you cannot say that the last mile in electricity has not been covered, the laptops are not there, and such people-friendly projects like the mobile clinics inside the slums.
Yes.
I am glad the ministry has informed me that they hope to roll them out by March next year. However much they annoy you, they will be there, and we shall see whether, because this maternity service, people will not utilize it or not. But let's go back.
When you say credit due to the government, one would also say that these are services that are expected in any case.
Oh, you have been here with me.
Public.
We have been here with me since independence, and if we really expected the kind of electricity or the kind of health services we have seen, at least the 50 years would have told a different story. This is a government coming in the 51st year.
So let me hold you on that point. Let me hold you on that point, sir. There's a reason why I'm holding you on that point.
Okay.
So you're saying we're talking about criticizing the government, but there's also giving credit. So in this conversation, you say the media is not giving enough credit?
Oh, I am saying it, and I'm saying particularly Nation Media Group branded it System ya Majambazi. Oh. Of course, that was rhyming very well with the people who have been in government as vice president, as prime ministers, never lifted a finger on corruption. But when they see this effort, they say, yes, the Jubilee government is fighting corruption because it is the most corrupt government we have seen. Of course, this is branding for political reasons. And if you are here as a party activist, it is good to say, I am rooting for this political party.
I'm really sorry, but this idea that the Jubilee government is fighting corruption, I think, is hogwash. And the second thing is, if you look at, when we talk of system ya majambas, you look at the scandals that this government has been involved in. They started even almost from the first time, immediately after he took office. Remember the Hustler Jet, we've had the Eurobond, NYS, SGR, laptops, the procurement of laptops, all of this have happened under this government. The idea that it is not happening or we should somehow ignore it, for me, it doesn't hold water.
All right, Dorothy.
You think the laptops in the schools today is a scandal?
Well, do you remember who you gave the tender to? The company that doesn't even
the government cancelled
it.
The government cancelled it. Give credit where it is due.
What? I give them credit because they cancelled a tender to
and
steal?
the SGR is coming. It is there for you to see.
There are problems.
Let's give Dorothy an opportunity here.
I have a problem. I think it would be a very strange, twisted-minded Kenyan, whether opposition or government, who would be upset by development. And I say that as a woman because development affects women most. If a road is impassable, it is the woman who is going to give birth on the road because there was no vehicle to rush her to hospital. So I would have a stake in development whether I'm in the opposition zone or in the government zone. Secondly, I don't like that narrative of government projects and opposition projects. I think all the projects should be citizens' projects so that if it is good for Gatundu, it should be good for Butere, where I come from.
Yes.
Okay?
And Charles, as you respond, there's something that when Kiraithe brought up about the recording, and people have questioned this in the practice of journalism, whether it should have been declared between Stella Murumba, the reporter, and the permanent secretary, when the principal secretary, when they met at the restaurant, as you respond to the allegation.
Yeah, just, you know, there is a big perception that there is corruption in the government. We don't know whether it's true or not, but the perception is there. And it would help if communication channels were open, so that when we make inquiries, we get answers. But, you know, we have seen the contempt with which the government treats the media. The continued narrative of gazeti ni ya kufunga nyama. Yet, you know, that can be a partner in, you know, verifying the truth and giving that information to the public. So as long as we continue with that situation where, you know, the media is a nuisance that should really be gotten rid of, then I think we keep landing ourselves where we find ourselves today. But on the question that you asked about the recording, I think in principle, secretly recording news source, if I may call it that way, is not allowed. But there are circumstances under which, you know, it is okay.
Investigative journalism.
Yes, especially where it is of immense public interest.
Like this
one. But you see that the media code of conduct, which was developed by industry and which was adopted by all, is very categorical on how it should be done. And therefore, if you secretly recorded somebody, then the station should explain to the public or to the listeners that it was necessary for us to secretly record this because this issue would not have come out otherwise.
Yes.
So, I mean, there are circumstances where it can be justifiable. But ordinarily, as an everyday conversation, it is frowned upon.
All right. Michael, because...
Mark, let me support my friend. Seems he's declared all of us technically opposition. But no, I think the Jubilee government is truly development-oriented at the level of intentions. Okay. And I think that is very clear in the Jubilee manifesto. And I think that's what we expect of every government that's seeking power. I think there has to be that intentionality. So I think I agree. Two, they've gone beyond intentionality, and we've seen some truly ambitious, visionary thinking around how we could transform this country. And not just the country generally. I still feel extremely saddened by what has happened to the dreams of a generation of young people, which was called the National Youth Service. The transformative agenda for National Youth Service is difficult to argue with. The idea and the intention is difficult to argue with. What has come of it? So we've seen every transformative idea, well conceived, being transformed by thieves within government and people with low integrity. And I'm not saying it is entire government, Mr. Kiraithe. There is certainly evidence that there is clear visioning on how we could transform this country. And there are elements within the state or people who are so proximal to the state and have significant persuasive power within the state to derail the transformative agenda of the Jubilee government. That is not in question. And I think when we look at what is happening, as a government, I would be worried about perceptions of corruption. I mean, we are not talking about perception to where we are now in the first 3-4 years of Jubilee government. We are talking about corruption, constipation. And you can't call that perception. And if I want to be nice, even if it was perception, it would concern me deeply as a government that is headed into a re-election. Number two, Mark, there's this lazy argument. I don't know why we peddle it, especially in the media, that, oh, you're politicizing. I have no idea what that thing means. There's nothing more political than lacking food in your house. There's nothing more political than having no access to water. There's nothing more political than Alex Madaga, whose family we still support to date, who died last October after spending 18 hours on multiple ambulances without access to medical care. Alex Madaga died after 18 hours in an ambulance, including outside Kenya's premier referral hospital, Kenyatta National Hospital, which could not take him in, a road traffic accident victim, a young man, less than 35, because there was no ICU bed capacity. He died after 2 private hospitals turned him down. He died when Kenyatta National Hospital had to send him to Kikuyu back so that they could change the gas cylinder, because the National Referral Hospital, where the worst of the worst goes to seek final help and redress, did not have an ICU bed for him. An ICU bed costs less than 20 million, I want to imagine. The government is arguing about only 3.1 billion.
You bring this down to the point of politicizing issues, and
yes. So you know, when you talk about politics, I have no idea what this means. First, it is not a favor to ask of government service delivery, because the government is elected and it has a clear mandate. The Jubilee government had a clear mandate. Right. It has to deliver. And every time you have a conversation around accountability, you say no, but the others might steal even more. It is okay for us to get a government on its toes, whichever government, because the government, like my good colleague has mentioned, Kweyu, that the government's responsibility is the delivery of services to the people. It doesn't matter which government, and the services are for the people of Kenya. So we must understand that there's nothing political more than...
Would this explain then why there's no screaming headlines about the development project?
Let me very quickly. Also, Mark.
Yes.
Thank you for inviting me here tonight, because I'm hearing very good things. Let me make it very clear. The government for which I speak does not view mobilizing public resources and other resources available to Kenya to get clinics, to build a modern railway, to supply water, which some people have called tunnels of death and all that, to supply laptops. The government does not view it as a favor. More or so, the government does not view investigating corruption through such audits, prosecuting as a favor to the people. And I think the president called the other arms of government and those under him charged with this in State House, and gave them a public telling off and told them, my government has given you everything you have asked for. And he said it, and nobody argued with that. I have given you all the independence you require. But these things are moving at a snail's pace. I wished that was the headline. But of course, you know, the initial headlines acknowledged that. But after about 24 hours, the whole story changed into the president has given up. We know that is not true. The other thing I would want to say is that anybody in this country who is looking at the pace at which this government is moving can be very sure that if we move at this pace, we might achieve Vision 2030 way ahead of time. And the other thing I would want to say, because I am also a Kenyan and I think people are looking at me and wondering, the NYA scandal is a shame to everybody. And it has annoyed anybody and everybody. And the government is looking forward to our investigating arms to the judiciary to move with speed. At least the asset recovery agency has recovered something.
Yes.
But the public, the government needs every coin back,
right,
so that we can give a reasonable promise, a redeemable promise to the youth of this country that the transformative agenda is working.
Right.
Again, it is the Jubilee government which has brought the transformative agenda to perspective. It is most unfortunate, very shameful that it had reached that hiccup, but still the government is promising the youth the National Youth Service vision, a vision of His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta himself, is still on course, thieves or no thieves.
All right. I like what you've just said in terms of the commitment of the government, but some would say that this is just mere actually propaganda or a change of tune in the sense initially it was denial and defending the Ministry of Devolution on the allegations and saying that this is actually nothing but propaganda from the opposition. I'd just like to play something here just to show us how politicized it can be, Bwana Orwa. On Friday last week, President Uhuru Kenyatta and his deputy William Ruto led the Jubilee Party in denying the existence of corruption in the government and blaming it on the opposition and the media. They spoke at a Jubilee Party National Governing Council meeting in Nairobi, and Sheila Sindeo, actually Leila, put this story together.
At the gathering held at the Bomas of Kenya, the Jubilee Party's top leadership addressed itself to the piling allegations of graft in government by pointing at the opposition as the boogeyman. This was synchronized messaging.
Na ndipo unaona sasa kazi yake ni pesa hii imeibiwa, pesa hii imeibiwa, hii ndio atutoe sisi kama wana Jubilee kutoka uwanja wetu wa mpira tuingiane kule na yeye tujibiane mambo ambayo hayako, na ndio tusahau yale ambayo tunayafanya na kule ambapo tunataka tuelekee. I want to tell you, my brothers and sisters, today, sisi wengine hatutatoka kwa uwanja wetu. Hatutatoka kwa uwanja wetu.
Hawa wenzetu mnaona wanapiga hii makelele na nduru ya mambo ya ufisadi, ni kwa sababu hiyo ni maneno ambayo wanakarabati ili tuondoke katika barabara ya kuwahudumia Wakenya.
The president and his deputy were categorical they would stay the course, this latest expression of defiance coming against a backdrop of graft allegations at the Ministry of Health. The two leaders blaming all graft allegations against their administration on opposition leader Raila Odinga in a thinly veiled attack.
Aendelee na matope yake na magazeti yake, sisi turudi kwa wananchi na kazi na maendeleo.
Hata hii ya juzi ya Ministry of Health ni fitina. So we must not be dragged into a game that is controlled by others, a narrative that have been weaved by others, so that we can be distracted from what we have achieved and what Kenyans expect of us.
The two leaders spoke glowingly of their term in office, saying they had accomplished a lot as they sought to address the emerging leadership wrangles within the Jubilee Party, with campaign season looming ahead of the August 2017 election.
And I'll give an opportunity to the panel to respond to this particular story in terms of the denial by the government about the latest scandal that is being reported and saying that it is propaganda. Now, you know how it is said that in politics there are no permanent friends or enemies. Well, it couldn't have been better illustrated than it was by the Deputy President, William Ruto, over the weekend. Only a week ago, the Deputy President listed recent corruption scandals from Afia House to Eurobond and termed them mere propaganda from the political opposition and the media. But over the weekend, Ruto called the NYS saga by its name: corruption that led to the loss of public funds. Now, this is a report by Sheila Sindeo.
Until not long ago, former Devolution Cabinet Secretary Anne Waiguru was a valued asset in President Kenyatta's cabinet, a minister with the air of power and connection, an invincible member of the innermost column of the Jubilee administration.
Making the promises a reality will require active participation.
But that confidence seems to have waned in the wake of an avalanche of barbs directed at her by those who were formerly her strongest defenders against allegations of corruption and sleaze. At the height of the outbreak of the NYS scandal, Deputy President William Ruto zealously defended Waiguru, giving the scandal his familiar label, propaganda.
Na kwa sababu wengi wameona ya kwamba we are targeting the core of our society, the young people of our nation, and using them as catalysts for development. Ndio wanazunguka na mambo mingi kujaribu to create a scandal out of our youth programs. And I tell them they will not succeed.
That was Ruto last year. Just over a year later, his ferocious political bazooka was turned on Anne Waiguru.
Kiingereza mingi mnafanyia catwalk hapa around, na ni wazi pesa ya umma imepotea. Mwenye hiyo pesa anasema aliweka kwa gunia. Sasa jameni, kweli dunia hii.
And what a difference a couple of months can make. In 2014, the Deputy President had to come to her aid after controversy over the replacement of Kiplimo Rugut with Nelson Githinji as NYS Director General, a replacement she allegedly made via text message. This he did even despite the political hit it generated in his own backyard.
Kazi ya kujua ni nani atafanya kazi wapi ni ya rais na mimi. Wewe endesha CDF na ile Uwezo Fund na hiyo cash transfer, wewe endesha hiyo. Hii wachia sisi. Na hatujalalamika ya kwamba tumeshindwa na kazi hiyo.
The tide began to shift after Waiguru spilled the beans on the theft of 1.6 billion shillings of NYS money, placing the Deputy President and some of his key allies at the center of the scandal. Majority Leader in the National Assembly, Aden Duale, was also one of her strongest defenders. At his press conference in October 2015, he led a group of Jubilee legislators in disowning a motion sponsored by Nandi Hills MP Alfred Keter seeking to impeach Waiguru over the NYS scandal.
The Jubilee coalition, its two principal parties and its all affiliate smaller parties, we are intact, we are ready to face the impeachment motions as a united front.
That tune would also change a few months later after he too was dragged into the NYS muck.
Ethics and Anti-Corruption, the DPP Asset Recovery Unit must go ahead and recover and seize all assets owned by one Anne Waiguru before she gets a psychiatric help.
The former devolution CS has had a number of high-profile defenders.
Tunataka mradi huu uwe mradi wa kusaidia vijana wetu waweze kujisimamia, na sisi kama wanasiasa tushirikiane, kwa sababu nia yetu yote ni kuboresha maisha ya wananchi wa jamhuri hii yetu ya Kenya. Hiyo ndio nia yetu.
On Thursday, the 25th of June 2015, State House also sent a statement saying the alleged fraud was aborted and that the investigations had been, quote, twisted to meet certain political ends, end of quote. And while her strongest defenders maintained no money had been stolen, then they are now heaping blame on her for the theft of about 1.6 billion shillings. Sheila Sendeo, NTV.
Interesting change of tune there, or tone. Quick reactions to this as we get to the last comment. And in terms of what it ends up being, a political thing or political game, back and forth. You're presented with this every other day as a managing editor at The Star. How do we respond to this when it is told that we are holding brief for opposition or government?
No, I think processes are very important. We have, as a country, worked hard after the Constitution to build institutions. Those institutions should be empowered to function. What politicians say really is neither here nor there. They flip-flop every day. I would not be surprised to hear one of these people praising Waiguru in the next 5 months because on the way to Damascus they saw the light. I don't know. I mean, I think if we could have the institutions functioning, it would be the best. I sat at the State House Summit on where this corruption was discussed. And initially, I was very skeptical about the invitation. I think all journalists are born with a level of skepticism. Not cynicism, but skepticism. But when I went through and listened carefully, and I realized that there was a lot of backpassing. DPP saying, you know, it's C.I.D. C.I.D. saying it is judiciary. Judiciary saying it's anti-corruption. You know, and everybody blamed everybody else. But when I left there, I had something very clear in my mind. That I think, that's a personal opinion, that the biggest hurdle to the fight and the prosecution of corruption cases is the judiciary. You have situations where cases just fail to move. Rich people, any rich person who is arrested falls sick immediately. So he will go and get a doctor's certificate. So the doctor connives and gives you a letter. Worst case scenario, if you are to be detained, there are rich people I know who have spent their entire detention at the private wing of Kenyatta Hospital because a doctor has said so. Then you have lawyers defeating justice. He says, no, I can't come to court. And, you know, they give excuses. Then there are magistrates who participate. You know, a case comes up and a magistrate postpones it and says they have put conservatory orders.
So how do these convictions inform how you approach a story then on corruption, such as this one, having known or come from that?
I don't think they really determine how we approach a story because, you know, as human beings, we also get discouraged. We write a lot about things that have happened and we see no movement. And many times we would like to see some action and we keep writing about it. But when, you know, we publish and you know, it's like it leaves one, it enters one ear, leaves the other. It doesn't really have a say or an influence in what we publish and what we need to publish because we are very clear about our mandate as the fourth estate. The public trusts us. They have put a lot of responsibility on our shoulders to say, we count on you to go and dig and tell us what the right information is. But it is also necessary to point out where then we see, you know, the roadblock. And the roadblock in the judiciary must be fixed by the new CJ. Cases must be heard. If somebody falls sick, the case should go on. Hosni Mubarak was in court in his hospital bed. That's the level we should reach, where a case goes on with or without somebody else.
Mark, there is something I want them to respond to. I will still reserve my right. For example, what we have seen is a story where somebody has drawn a storyline and put in characters. The deputy president has said, hii story ya afya kuna ukarabati. But looking at the truth, I would want, as we go on, to respond. Is it true that it is not only the truth, lakini imekarabatiwa?
But here he made the assertion that indeed it's fitna all from
fitina,
the opposition.
Fitina is
Certainly
not necessarily the entire thing. The fitina is not usually. Kuna fitina ndani. Niambie whether kuna ukarabati, whether kuna fitina. And
what you're saying here is
there is something I want
to
hold very clear. Whether there is choreography, whether there is a manipulation, whatever you call it. Ukarabati na fitina. Then the final thing I want to make very clear. As at this point, the government is saying no money has been stolen in Hafi House. If tomorrow, after the conclusion of this audit, you know, EACC is already there and even the Auditor General now got in. If they come out and it is clear, and I have trust that even if we are covering the truth, somebody will come out with it. If it happens that Kiraithe stole some money, would you say that what I said today was a lie? What we are saying is that as at the point the deputy president and the president were commenting on the NYS scandal, investigations were still incomplete.
Yeah, but they
Mark, that is why I say there is a failure of leadership at the topmost. Precisely because of what we have seen and what Kiraithe is saying, is the topmost leadership of this country, its body language, its voice, its mannerisms, its dances, do not inspire confidence in the fight against corruption. Precisely for that, what we have seen there, and because We know investigation, responsible leadership, especially at the level of the commander-in-chief and his deputy, would require some level of restraint, discipline, and fatherly advice to a people. What they took as a red line and declaration at a time of investigation is contradictory to the process of justice and unveiling of the truth. So I think that at the core is the problem we are having in this country. Now allow me to say this, and I have a little bit of a concern with even our journalism and media in this country on the struggle against corruption. I don't think the media is doing its part. It could do certainly more. But let me say that if today, there are 3 simple steps, Mark. If we wanted to judge the success or its failure, the Jubilee success or failure, or the government failure or success in fighting corruption, there are 3 simple steps. One is the declarations that they make, which they did in the Jubilee manifesto. In fact, they promised they'll have some of the strongest anti-corruption laws in the world to fight, including parliamentary immunity from corruption charges. Parliament today is the biggest obstacle, and Parliamentary Accounts Committee, which is led by the opposition, is remaining a major failure in the struggle against corruption today. So I want to be very clear first that there is no monopoly of integrity among our politicians. So it has to go on record, because the failures in Parliament are failures similar to the failures we see, and the opposition sometimes go easy as soon as a few of their leading lights are mentioned. NYS case in point. So I think we need to point out to the fact that the government need 3 simple steps. One is the declaration they make. That's what we judge them with, and we take that. And I miss President Kenyatta of May and November last year, when he spoke to the nation. You could buy that is actually this had reached a level where the president was saying it's no longer sustainable. We have to do something. I don't see that today. I don't know if it's elections. So the declarations they make. Number 2 is the actions we take in order to defeat corruption. The actions we take, whether it's people stepping aside, stepping over, or people being fired, or whatever it is, or people being arrested. Number 3 are the results. We are 0 at the level of results to show for this, other than people stepping aside. We have Muraguri still in office today. I have mentioned the Gavi immunization and vaccine money, 160 million. This was completed and dusted and filed last year. Can the government tell us who? One single public officer who is in jail for robbing the mothers and children of this country 160 million.
All right,
and they're probably being promoted.
You mentioned
today.
the themes that should be followed in that. Dorothy first and then Gathara. Ukarabati first of all in
Ukarabati. Ukarabati, for me that has connotations of fabrication. Yes or no?
Yes.
And my take is that there cannot be Ukarabati, because where there is smoke, there is fire. And it is that smoke that we journalists follow. And in the process, we dig up information which ends up in the Goldenberg, Angle leasing type stories. So let us put aside that Ukarabati narrative. Secondly, my chairman made a very important point, and I have to commend him for that. There is despair setting in when you continue writing and seeing nothing happening. And I have to say it with all due conscience that we have corruption at the very high level, you know. Last year, early last year, we had that very unfortunate case where school children were tear gassed, and it was on the orders of very high authorities, we were told. And at that time, none other than the deputy president said that he had nothing to do with the land in dispute or the hotel in dispute. Later on, when things got hot, he said, yes, it is, and he has a right to own the hotel. Maybe I'm not quoting him verbatim, but I followed that story, and I followed it as a woman, because when children are tear gassed, I cry with them. So we have a very bad situation in this country where corruption is at the highest possible level. One thing that I would urge my president, and I love my president, is to fight corruption from the person sitting next to him. Because there are many cases, there are only cases, of course, those are allegations. But before the next election, is it possible to put aside all the small cases and investigate every case that concerns the DP, so that when he goes as the running mate, he goes a clean man with no shade of, not that he has stolen, maybe he hasn't. Most probably he hasn't, but let him be clean. I'm sorry to say that, and that is my last point.
All right. Okay. Your response, first of all, to what we played and the,
I think what you played, for me, I mean, I tend to agree with what Michael said.
Yes.
About the declarations that come out of government that then lead to despair. But I think more fundamentally for me, the problem is really situated within the press and how the press reports not just about corruption, but about our whole governance system, where it reduces it to a fight between CORD and Jubilee. It's, it's what you call politicization. Politics should be about our problems.
Okay.
And that's what we should be discussing, but we end up discussing the personalities around them and who's going to win, who's not going to win. I think what we call the fight against corruption has now been reduced only to prosecutions. How we're looking at, how many people have been prosecuted, how many people have stepped aside, etc. Yet I think the major function of the executive is not to prosecute. We've got the judiciary to do that. And they can legitimately get flagged for not doing it. The other organs, investigative organs, police, etc., can get flagged for that. But the point for the executive really should be about reforming the system to eliminate the opportunities for graft. And that is where we don't have a discussion. We had police vetting, that showed us policemen sending M-Pesa to who? Their bosses, etc. Where is the reform discussion? How do we change that system, so that this does not happen anymore? Right. That's not discussed. The other thing is, you spoke about the asset recovery program. I will remind you that government is not just a Jubilee government. We have a continuity of government. And if you go back to the reports we have, going all the way back to the 90s, and ask how many of those has the Jubilee government, or the Jubilee administration taken up and said, all right, we know the money went in Golden Bank. Why don't we prosecute those guys? We know it went in Agno-leasing. Why don't we prosecute those guys? And not just prosecute, how do we reform the system so it doesn't happen again? And I think when you look at things like the Kroll report that the Kibaki administration had commissioned and then rubbished its own thing that pointed, what, is 100 million? Dollars that the Moya regime had stashed away. How much of that have we gotten back? How come nobody ever discusses the Kroll report? And this is what I'm saying is we have the pretense of fighting corruption, but we are not actually changing the systems that we have. We're not reforming them to ensure that corruption cannot happen, and that when it does happen, it's punished. When you speak about the judiciary, I would ask, which of our independent offices function the way the Constitution envisaged they should function?
Right.
And you find a lot of times, it is what the president wants, what the executive wants that carries the day. They don't behave as if they are independent. And these are all institutional problems that we have. Institutions aren't just about organizations. They are ways of doing things. And if we can have a situation where the president stands up and says, I will violate a court order, clearly, as he did after the Garissa attack, when we have situations where we've got him nominating for Interior Secretary, somebody whose prosecution has been recommended by the TJRC report, we've got a problem.
Okay.
You know, when vetting of officers doesn't actually work as it's supposed to.
All right, we're now in the point.
Let me wind up.
And these are things that need to be followed up.
In terms of institutions, I found it very hard to agree with Gathara, but in terms of institutions waking up, strengthening institutions not waiting for the president to get frustrated so that they work, I totally agree with him. The other thing I would want to tell him is that in the fullness of time, all these things will be revisited. But I think the president has been very clear. Let us deal with these ones first. He actually said it twice at the summit and during the Mashujaa Day. He said, I am emptying the courts of chicken thieves so that you can put up big time thieves. I think those are very, very clear signals. Nobody has actually questioned President Uhuru's independence to the institutions. I don't think there is anywhere where it has mentioned that he lifted a telephone call and called anybody. And having interacted with them myself, I know this man wants this country to move forward the way he is saying.
Speaking of moving forward, the last comment.
Finally, the last comment I would want to make
yes,
is that Mark,
yes,
I still challenge you to give that interim report to one of the auditors within Daily Nation, within the Nation Media Group, and seek of his opinion on how it was handled.
Okay.
Because if simple computations is 3.1 and then it is reported 5.2, if simple visibility is that there are containers but the report says there are none, I think there is ukarabati there. And having been a student of journalism myself, I think journalists have a responsibility, not to the state, not to the opposition, but to the truth.
Oh.
And I really stand opposed when you do documentaries like the one you saw, intent to prove that so and so is not sincere in the corruption war. And of course, furthering individuals' political interests, I don't think it is professional journalism. Otherwise, I thank everybody. I respect your opinion. And this government values journalists who expose corruption, believe it or not.
Then why were you
Mark, the government
beating up protesters
journalists? This is the contradiction. I don't think Bwana Kiraithe believes in his last statement. Yeah? Yes. Because precisely for those kind of contradictions, the president has gone on record asking for citizens to rise up in a spirit of active citizenship.
Yes.
Whistleblowers. Our record of protecting whistleblowers is not worth writing home about. You have people who are coming to put pressure and demand accountability, and we spend more energy on crushing them, beating them up, scuttling them, than we would spend in fighting actually corruption. These are citizens coming up to help the president because he said, "Munataka ni do." Yeah. So and we land with them. And you know, we have system of that is anchored on impunity. My sister mentioned Langata Road, up to date, the on record. This is not ukarabati. You are actually, and I think I want media to transcend the sensationalization and go to the next level. We need media to invest in investigative journalism. Investigative journalism takes resources. It takes time. It takes training and skills. It takes training in ethics and stuff, all these processes we are talking about. We need editors to be able to assign and give the leeway to journalists who break. If Stella Murumba wanted to go to the depth of this story, or she wanted to take on the Gavi, and she wanted to create relationships between the 160 million and how many emergency ICU beds it would buy across 47 counties, would she be assigned a different assignment and sent to West Pokot to cover something else? We need transformative thinking within the media. Media activism is essential to raising the accountability levels in this country. Where we have reached, we need media activism, and unapologetically so. I don't think you need to apologize for being activist in nature, because the media's responsibility is to keep the society informed.
One would say they're not sober. If you're an activist, you're not sober.
No, forget those people who don't understand the spirit of active citizens.
Then if you want to be an activist, if you want to be a political crucifier to certain political interests, declare yourself so that we know.
Let me say, well, I think activism,
so that when I open
the current,
NTV, I know that you are crucifying Eric or you are crucifying Orwa, and I know what to think about
there's
it.
quite a little bit of lack of imagination when people talk about activism.
Yes.
Because first, I think the state has not would speak of activism in one way and condemn activism in another, because it's lack of understanding of this thing called activism. Activists are active citizens. They are people who care deeply about issues that most of us are busy about, too busy or less concerned about. And activists are people who actually take their time. They are on desks, they are on computers, they are on the streets, they are helping people. Those are active citizens, so and that's what my point is. I think in addition to investigative journalism, I think fact-checking is particularly important. Outlining the contradictions that we are seeing here and just saying, basically, Orwa, last year you said this, today you are saying this. Which one do we take to the bank? It is important. Allow me to finish. Yes. We need to do a very thorough analysis of socio-economic impact of corruption on Kenyans. These billions, we are flabbergasted. You know, like, the government, I said, is arguing about 3.1 versus 5 billion. You know, billion. We need to break this down into its constituent parts as media, and that needs sustained onslaught on corruption. We need the media to follow up with frontline institutions of that fight corruption in this country. The list of 175 list of shame. Where are they? How many moved to ODPP? How many are in the court system? How many have been prosecuted? Today, some ultra-corrupt, and I call them genetically corrupt people, would probably prefer going through the court process because they'll probably be acquitted. And they'll say, you know, look, I was even acquitted. It's a seal of approval. Media needs to stop celebrating thieves. We need to stop giving them airtime. We need to give them a media blackout in order to bring conversations around integrity back to this country. Let's stop feeding the ogre of corruption as media.
All right.
Well, Mark, my friend has a very forceful opinions. But I guess I think activism might be wrong. We call it campaign journalism.
Okay.
And when the media campaigns again about you know, lack of cancer machines in KNH, or the fact that patients have to wait for 5 days to get treatment.
System ya majambazi?
That is campaign journalism. Okay. But first of all, I don't believe that these stories that we have published, including the one for the Ministry of Health, are commissioned or done for the sake of the opposition. I have heard people in government saying that we were working for the opposition. I guess when the opposition jumps onto a story, I mean, when they see such a story, for them, you know, it is their bread and butter. Yeah. But to say then that the media has been commissioned by the opposition, I think, you know, is oversimplifying the issue. I was going to say that media houses should strengthen investigative journalism and fact-checking, but my neighbor here has been reading my notes. So I shall not repeat that.
Be careful, Matiang'i has done something around exams.
But I'm thinking that it is in everybody's interest, including the government and civil society and the public, not to let fatigue set in with these stories of corruption. Where there is no prosecution, it breeds impunity. And everybody else knows that you can get away with it. And you can steal 5 billion, then you can be detained, go through the process, maybe pay some money somewhere and remain with 500 million. In which case, you're teaching the people that actually corruption pays. May I also point out that I think the public should also get fed up with corruption. I don't think they are really fed up. I think they just read out of interest. There is nothing the public enjoys more than tearing down big people in government and, you know, in society. And they really cherish such things. But in Kenya, I get the feeling that you know, we don't have to turn everything into code versus Jubilee. We have brought out a sincere issue about the Ministry of Health. Let's discuss the issue. Of course, the opposition is the opposition. As for 3 days we have talked about Ministry of Health, everybody is quiet. The moment Raila speaks, the whole of Jubilee says, unaona, sasa Raila ameongea. Now the problem is the narrative gets lost from the issue of the stolen money. It becomes now an issue of, you know, code versus Jubilee. So I think I'm stressing that until the public gets really fed up with corruption, we are likely to see 1 or 2 more coming.
All right. You said you're done, but your last comment before Gathara. Your last point, Dorothy.
Okay. I think that we will need to fight corruption right from the domestic level. And
this is to the media.
Yes. Because I mean that the media should cover corruption from the domestic level. We should write about what is happening to make children desist from lies and cheating. I think there's so much greed in this country that so that the CS has to personally go to schools to prevent cheating. It all has to do with greed because somebody wants to get a grade that he or she doesn't deserve, you know? And so over ambition. We can achieve those grades without stealing. And how can we tell our children that if so-and-so stole the paper for the son, it is not what I can do for you. I want you to think because I've been paying your fees. And if I've been paying your fees, I was paying you to think. So let us start and let the media pick those stories, you know? Yes. The heroes out there who are trying to prevent their children from becoming thieves. The heroes out there who are teaching their children moderation, you know, that you don't have to wear the shiniest shoe in town, you know. Just teach them to live simple.
Okay. Thank you. Domestic level reportage. Yes.
I think we need to move away from seeing corruption as personality failures, that it is just bad people, you say genetically corrupt people. I think we need to understand it, and the Deputy President was actually right, I think it was 2 years ago, when he talked of systemic failures. And that is what corruption is. It's a failure of the system. We need to actually start looking at how do we reform the systems. When we see no prosecutions, what we should be asking is, why aren't prosecutions happening? You know, what is the problem? What is the systemic problem that prevents them happening? Right. What's the systemic problem that prevents us doing anything about what police vetting has revealed, or doing something about the failures of parliamentary vetting? You know, these are all systems. You know. Okay. And it's not that the case that I totally disagree with Charles. I don't think that it is the case that Kenyans aren't tired of corruptions. They are. They've been screaming about it, you know, all the way back from the 90s on. You know, people have been shouting about it. People want action. But I think the way it is portrayed and the way it is brought to them as if it is just this political football between government and opposition, and not about the issues, not about what the problem is. So our politics don't function to solve our problems. They function to solve the problems of politicians. Okay. So we are much more invested in whether Waiguru or Ruto, who comes out on top, rather than how is IFMIS going to be reformed, so that we don't see the same problem happening.
Questions to the system.
Right. Fix the system, not the personalities. You know, ignore the personalities aren't the problem.
Don't get carried away with the personalities.
Yeah, the system itself incentivizes behavior. Okay. And that behavior today that it's incentivizing is a behavior that rewards the people who steal. All right. And punishes the people who stand against them.
When you activate a system by carrying out an internal audit, then you are being asked to resign because you decided to do an early detection mechanism before the money disappears to the last shilling. When you are crucified for it, everybody starts saying, Kumbe, I could have waited. So I think also The truth might be tasteless. Being factual sometimes is not exciting. But as a country, I think if we limited ourselves to facts and the truth, by not appearing to campaign all the time, that there are things we want. This is an interim report. Bwana Waziri, can you speed it up and give us a final report?
Okay.
Even if there is somebody independent to come and oversee that nobody anafanya ukarabati. I think if we limited ourselves to the truth and to facts, and I agree with everybody here, every thief in this country is a prominent businessman, a prominent politician. I think if we called a prominent thief, and we were really frank about it, and gave credit where it is due, then I think we would get somewhere. Because systems are good as the people who run them.
All right, we're talking about misappropriation of funds, but it's misappropriation of time. You have to finish your final point because you're the last person.
Yeah, I think to just go back what you said about the interim audits. You know, the government should come to expect that it will be held to account and that people will go out looking for, to crucify public servants. That is not a problem. You should come to expect it. And actually, we should hold them to a much higher standards because they hold our money and they actually exercise power over us.
All right.
You know, so it is not a problem that the thing leaked. You know, the problem is the reaction to the leak, which is where it comes to cover-ups and we are denying and we are threatening and we are beating up people who come out simply to say this is what the president should do.
All right.
That is an institutional failure.
Okay.
By the way, one clarification. The government has no problem whatsoever with any demonstration.
All right.
But in doing your demonstration, remember other Kenyans are going to work. Remember other Kenyans are going to hospital. Remember your rights should not dictate what I do. I might choose not. And kindly remember, stones, weapons, and all that are not part of it. I don't know the circumstances under which they were dispersed.
Well, they never even moved out of...
I hope whoever is investigating moves fast enough. This government respects the right to processions as it is in the Constitution. And even when I came here, thank you for mentioning that I've forgotten, I was given a clear instruction to remind the Kenyans that provided you are doing things in a civilized way, you are liaising in the police so that you don't block any roads, you have yourself made enough arrangements for security. Because if you assemble 2,000 people, at least you should find 200 to ensure that it is not overtaken by criminality.
Kiraithe, I don't know if this is a message you're making to the opposition that had actually said that if the PS and CS do not resign, we're going to the streets tomorrow, that is Tuesday. There was a report on that last week. But we will assure you that the reportage and coverage on the same issue will definitely continue. The hard questions will keep being asked. And I hope you'll keep watching Press Pass, though we go way past our time here. Thank you to the team that has been persevering in staying and standing behind the camera there. Thank you very much, gentlemen and lady, and also to my director and to my guests. Thank you for making this worth our while and to the viewer.